So we mentioned last week, we discussed verse 1, and we talked about the life of Sarah, 127 years, 100 years, 20 years, 7 years was the life of Sarah. We discussed the redundancy, and we discussed why we named the parsha Life of Sarah. So we had a little bit about that. And now we're going to start to think about the second verse, which I promised to look at. We spoke about a little bit of the second verse last week too. We talked about the eulogy before the crying, and the crying with the small chaf. So we discussed that, but we want to focus on the beginning, which is verse 2. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron. So we have the location. We know where she passed away. Page 107. We have the location. Oh no, yours is something else. Yours is the God one. So you have to look at. You just have to find the chapter. Chapter 23, verse 2. So Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron. So we have two names of the place. We have Kiryat Arba and Hebron. Why is it called? Why does the place have two names? Well, it has two names because it just has two names. Over time, you see the settlement in the land of Israel was very ancient. So it could be the earlier settlers called it Kiryat Arba, the city of four. Kiryat is city, Kiryat is city, Kiryat Arba, the city of four. And later, maybe perhaps it was called Hebron. So, but it is interesting that the Torah is going to give you two names for the same place. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to figure out why we have the double name, even on the simple level. We'll read the Rashi, and then we'll look at maybe a little bit more mystical interpretations that will give us insight into the city of Hebron and why it's so spiritual, and why that was the place chosen for the burial place of the patriarchs and matriarchs. I just want to open up the Rashi here. I apologize. Okay, I'm going to read the Rashi here. Do they have it over here? Yeah, you have it in the art scroll too, on page 107, beneath the column left-hand side, where it says number 2. So he quotes Rashi. Let's read number. So we can read it. Whatever. We'll just trying to figure out where to read it from. I'll read it from the Rashi itself. The art scroll, there's a little bit of a change. I'll read it from the Rashi itself, but you can see it in the art scroll as well. It says Rashi as follows: Kiryat Arba. Literally, Kiryat Arba means the city of four. Literally, the city of four. So named because the four giants who were there: Achiman, Sheshai, Talmai, and their father. Genesis Rabbah from Numbers. There were four giants in Hebron. Where do you see that later? So this is a medrash that comes later from later on in this, when the Torah tells us the story of the spies in the book of Numbers. When Moshe sends the spies to Israel, it says that they come to Hebron. They come from the south to the north. So the spies come to Hebron, and what they see frightens them. Why? Because it happens to be Hebron was the city of the giants. I don't know what a giant means. I don't know how many feet you need to be considered a giant, but that's what it says. If you want to look, if not, I'll read it. I'm just going to read on, and here it's page 801, page 801, verse 22. So you have the spies. I'm just going to read. They ascended in the south and arrived in Hebron, where there were Achiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the offspring of the giants. So that's what it says in Numbers. So Rashi over here says, why is this called Kiryat Arba, the city of the four? For what? Four giants. That's the first interpretation. Another explanation, because of the four couples that were buried there: man and wife, Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah. Adam and wife. Yeah, Adam and Eve. Man and wife. Oh, man and wife means couples. Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebecca, and Jacob and Leah. That comes from the Medrash. So what do we see? We have two interpretations of Rashi. What are the difference between the two? What is the difference between the two interpretations? So I think the difference is to figure out what is the origin of the name. If you say it's for the four couples, Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Jacob, Isaac and Rebecca, and Jacob and Leah, then when was it called the city of four? And who named it the city of four? Then it was the Jewish people who named it the city of four, because it was only the city of the four for the four couples many generations after the establishment of the city, when Abraham after this time period. So according to the second interpretation, when the verse says the city of four, it wasn't yet the city of four when the story occurred, right? When Moshe wrote the Torah, it was the city of four. You see what I'm saying? According to the second interpretation, it was the Jews named it the city of four. According to the first interpretation, because of the Canaanite giants, then it could have been the city of four. Was not named by the people.
Who was there first, the giants or
the giants? It was a Canaanite city. You'll see Moshe comes, Abraham comes to buy real estate, and you're going to have a whole real estate negotiation on this page. He needs to buy it, and he needs permission from the local people, the city of Chet, the children of Chet. So there was certainly a settlement before Abraham shows on the scene. The question is the naming of the city of Kiryat Arba. Who gave this city the name of the city of four?
Did the giants do anything special? Like
no, they were just famous. They were famous people. Like if you had you go to a certain city and say, who are the famous people that live in the city? Oh, you go to the Wikipedia page. Any Wikipedia page for any city will tell you the notable people that live in this town. Why? Because they got good basketball players. Because that's just, yes, Steve.
So if I remember right, the Medrash teaches that Adam was a giant and his height was diminished after committing sin.
Right.
So consequently, the people who were descendants of Adam were actually descendants of the giant.
Right. So Adam was a giant until he sinned. The question, of course, is when the Medrash says he's a giant, the Medrash could be talking figuratively, right? It doesn't have to be literal. When you say Adam was a giant, it means he was a spiritual giant, right? It could be he was physical, it could be he was greater, taller than we are. So it's hard to know precisely because the Medrash is a book that doesn't always tell you when it's talking in the literal sense and when it's talking in the figurative sense. When you talk about the verse, we have a rule that the verse always has the simple meaning, and the simple meaning is accurate. So when we read the verse, everything what we read in the verse is in addition to the simple reading, because the verse has a simple meaning, and it was designed to be understood simply. So the additional mystical interpretations are in addition. But the Medrash, at least some of the Medrashim were written, in an allegory to begin with. So it's not always clear what the Medrash is saying. But you're right. This is not the first time the giants are mentioned. There's a mention of them in the book of Genesis. When it talks about the corruption of the people, the giants, took part in this corruption because of their physical might. People honored them. So when they become corrupt, the entire society becomes corrupt. That's at the end of the portion of Bereshit. I think it's Genesis chapter 5 or so. There he calls them Nephilim. Nephilim could mean giants. Nephilim could mean the ones who fell from the heavens. There's an interesting medrash there, but that's for that. All I'm trying to say, give me just 1 second, Steve. All I'm trying to say is that two interpretations of Rashi depend on who named, when it was named, right? When it was named Kiryat Arba, the city of four. If you say the first interpretation that it was because of the four giants, so it was named before the Jewish people. If you say it was named the city of four because of the four couples include our patriarchs and Adam, patriarchs and matriarchs. So at this point in the story, it wasn't yet the city of four, right? Because Jacob is not buried there until the last chapter of the book of Genesis. So the bottom line is, this is Moshe writing, God's writing to the Jewish people. They were buried where? In the city of four, which later becomes named the city of four. That's just the two interpretations of Rashi. And again, it's not just two reasons, but it's also the question of who named it the city of four. That's my first point. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, it's not difficult to imagine digging a trench and finding a dinosaur.
In Hebron.
Anywhere. And this can happen a few times. And I can imagine that he would say to himself, oh, there must have been
giants here. Right. But they got the number four. So they found four pieces of evidence. Yeah. Yeah. So that would be named not by the Jewish people, but by the local populace before Abraham, before the Jewish people come onto the scene. Okay. So that's the first point. That's the two interpretations of Rashi. From Rashi, we go to interpretations that are a little bit more spiritual, so to speak. In other words, okay, who cares who named it? It's named, not it. It's named. That's what it's called. We don't always get an interpretation for exactly why a city is named in a certain way. So just thinking about, before you even get your poetic hats on, just thinking about this names of the city. Kiryat Arba, city of four. Okay, then you have the word Chevron. What does Chevron mean? The word Chevron, the root of Chevron is chibur, bonding. Lechaber, to bond, to connect. So you have city of four, and then you have connection. Four is multiplicity. City, the Chevron means connection. So as soon as you introduce these two names, it's almost opposite names or different names. Now everybody starts going wild with their spiritual interpretations. Go ahead, Neil.
Question for you. Isn't the word for connection kesher? That's one word.
Kesher is a knot. Chibur, lechaber so it's a specific type of bond. Is kesher, likshor is to tie. So tie with a knot. But lechaber is to attach. Chibur, even in modern Hebrew, even in biblical Hebrew, chaver is a friend. It's all the same roots. Same root. Your friend, you're connected to your friend. Lechaber is to connect, to attach. There's all different kinds of attaching. Likshor is one way to connect, but the root is connection. So we have city of four, which is connection. Okay, right away you see something is happening here. It's not just two names of a place, but there could be there's more here, and that's when the various commentaries, certainly the more spiritual ones, are try to explain that there's actually a spiritual interpretation for what this means. So, just giving you a sampling here. One is Rabbeinu Bechaye. He's a relatively early commentator, 13th century, and he was a Kabbalist. And he says like this. He says, number four. What is four? If you want to talk about the spiritual worlds, what is four? So we know there's four spiritual worlds. He doesn't say that in this context, but he says we know there are four groups of angels. If you read the descriptions of the chariot of Ezekiel, there are four groups of angels. So he says, Chevron is the place where the soul ascends heavenward and connects to God. And connects to God with the four chariots of angels. In other words, where the soul ascends and becomes angelic and connects to God at the time of passing. And that's why the Torah alludes to what happens when Sarah passes away. Where is she? Where is she? So she's in Chevron. Chevron means connection to God. Where is she? In the spiritual worlds, in the city of four. The city of four is the four camps of angels. In other words, the Torah, even though the Torah explicitly does not talk about the afterlife, but the Torah alludes to it, according to Rabbeinu Bechaye, Torah alludes to it in these verses. That the passing is really chibur, it's really connection with God, and now the soul is with the camps of the angels. So that's his interpretation. Another similar interpretation is from the Or HaChaim, also 300 years ago, but also a Kabbalist, and he says like this. He says, I'm picking up my notes here. He says, what is the meaning of death and why does death occur? So sometimes death occurs as a point of punishment. Somebody does something wrong, the death is the punishment. But not so with the righteous. So what he says is, the early philosophers, certainly Greek philosophers, said that everything in the world is comprised of four elements. It was fire, water, wind, and earth. And that's the way they understood the science at the time. And they say the reason why the righteous person is going to pass away is not because of anything they did wrong. It's because physicality, which is combined of the four elements, anything that's combined from the four elements is also going to separate. Maimonides talks about this in the beginning of his work. Anything combined from the four elements, anything physical is going to have to separate. That's his premise. And the way to read this, Sarah passed away. Why? Not where also, but why? In Kiryat Arba, because in the city of four, meaning we the human body is a city of four. The Medrash talks about this, it's alluded to in Tanya, that the human body is considered a small city. So Sarah passes away because we're a city combined of four. He Chevron, we have four elements that are tied together with the power of the soul. but ultimately anything that's been comprised is also going to be separated. And in other words, according to the Orach Chaim, when he says Kiryat Arba, it's telling you, make no mistake that she died because of something negative. She died simply because a human being, a physical entity, ultimately is going to separate. That's the Orach Chaim's interpretation. Go ahead, Seth. Oh. Okay, so go ahead.
Just that geographically, north, south, east, west, kind of makes sense too.
It's the center point. You're saying Hebron is pretty center in the land of Israel, but to east-west, north and south, today it's more the center because Israel now is pulled way down to Eilat. But in biblical Hebrew, in biblical Israel went much farther north.
No, actually, I didn't mean that.
Oh, what do you
just
mean?
like in general, like when you see 4.
Oh, you say 4, you mean all elements. Yes.
All directions.
All directions, but
in the 2-dimensional space.
All directions, but all coming together within a human being. So Hebron is the connection of the 4, and that's the human being. And what connects the human being is the soul. The life, right? Once the soul passes, the body decomposes. So what holds it together is the life. So what we're saying is that the place, the name of the place, also represents the fact that what is a human being? A human being is comprised of the 4 elements, held together with the soul, but anything comprised from the 4 elements is ultimately going to be separated. In other words, she passes away not as a result of sin or anything negative, but just that's because that's just the human nature. So that is that's the Orach Chaim. And of course, like I mentioned, Rabbeinu Bachaya is saying, no, it's giving you the spiritual meaning of death. What happens at death? At death, we are attached. Hebron is attachment. We are attached to God, and we become part of the 4 elements, the city of 4, the 4 camps of angels. So this is just a sampling of what the commentators are saying about this notion of double name. When the Torah is going to give us 2 names for a city, it's not just because it wants to know where it is on the map. If that were the case, just say 1 name, right? But if you're giving multiple names, your Torah is alluding to that there's a deeper message that the Torah is conveying, in addition to the simple message, which is to help you find it on the map.
400, you negotiated with 400 shekel.
Yes, so that's number 4, keeps repeating itself, right? 400 shekel, and here you have the city of 4. He negotiated, we'll talk about the negotiation in a minute. We have a lot of, at least there's many verses about the negotiation, which is interesting and actually telling. So we have to derive what is it trying to tell us. But again, you're right that there's also 4 reappears. 400, all it is 4 multiplying to 4.
That because it was 400 per.
Kiryat Arba, the city of 4. Okay. Okay. Maybe.
Maybe it went the other way. They called it the city of
Right.
4 and they decided
That's it. The city of 4, that's what the real estate costs here. 4 and 400 reminds me of a joke, not a joke. There's a Jew who told me, it's a true story, I'm not going to say his name here, but he told me, in my business, I told my employee that whatever it cost us, the customer comes in, whatever it costs us, we're going to have 0 markup. 0 markup. I'm listening. What is this guy telling me? 0 markup. How are you going to make a living? He says, very simple. Whatever it costs us, just add a 0. 0 markup. So, so here at the 400, they just added 2 zeros, I guess. Okay. Okay, because it went over well, I'll tell you that the joke was from Rabbi Shem Tov, Mariashi's father. I didn't want to say it before I got a laugh. I got a laugh now. I tell you who it was. Okay, fine.
That's a joke he would tell.
He told it. Yeah, he would tell it. Okay, we have from verse 3 all the way to verse 15. We have back and forth of a negotiation, which is very uncharacteristic. There are other places where the Torah tells us where people bought real estate. Jacob, when he came back from Haran, he bought real estate. 1 verse told us the price, 100 ksita. We don't have to hear about every negotiation. When you buy your house, what were the counter offers and how they went up and how they went down. Why is this important? And it's not just once, it happens again and again and again, back and forth. In short, the issue is that they don't really want to sell. They want a gift. They don't want to sell. And Abraham is saying, let me pay, I'll pay full price. Finally, they agree, and they find a guy, Ephron, who said, well, Abraham identifies which piece of land he wants. And finally, the guy says, take it for free. And Abraham insists he wants to pay. And finally, they take the money, but they don't just take a little money, they take a lot of money. But and finally, Abraham has the piece of land which will allow him to bury his wife. Okay, the question, of course, is why do I need all this negotiation? So we're going to just read a few verses just to get a little bit of the flavor of what's happening here. So we'll understand what really is at stake over here. Okay, so we're back at the verses, and verse 3. And Abraham arose from before his dead, and he spoke to the sons of Het, saying, so we know that the land of Canaan was called the land of Canaan, but it wasn't just Canaan. Canaan was just one people. It was really, there were 7 nations in Canaan. Canaan was the most prominent and the largest, so sometimes the land is collectively called as the land of Canaan, but the region of Hebron was settled by the children of Het, and they're one of the 7 nations that lived in the land of Canaan, which are listed in the Torah. In any case, what does he say? He speaks to the people of Het, saying, verse 4, I am a stranger and an inhabitant with you. Give me a burial property with you, so that I may bury my dead from before me. Tanuli, can I have a burial spot? Verse 5, and the sons of Het answered Abraham, saying to him, listen to us, my Lord. You are a prince of God in our midst. In the choicest of our graves, bury your dead. None of us will withhold this grave from you to bury your dead. He says, we respect you. You're a prince of God. You could take any burial spots. Sounds like they're very willing. Abraham doesn't agree. Abraham arose and prostrated himself to the people of the land, the sons of Het, verse 8. And he spoke with them, saying, if it is your will that I bury my dead from before me, listen to me and entreat for me to Ephron, the son of Tzochar, that he may give me the Machpelah, the double cave, which belongs to him, which is at the end of his field, for a full price. Let him give it to me in your midst for a burial property. So basically, I want this guy and I want to pay full price for his field, for the cave that is part of his field. Ephron is sitting there, and I'm going to skip verse 10, just too long. Verse 11, he says, no, my Lord, listen to me. I have given you the field and the cave that is in it. I have given it to you before the eyes of the sons of my people. I have given it to you, bury your dead. He insists, no, I don't want to take money. I want to give it to you. That's what Ephron, in the presence of all the people, is insisting to Abraham. It's a gift. And Abraham prostrated himself before the people of the land. And he spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, saying, but if only you would listen to me. I am giving the money for the field. Take it from me, and I will bury my dead there. And Ephron replied to him, saying, my Lord, listen to me. A piece of land with 400 shekels of silver, which is, what is it between me and you? Bury your dead. So Ephron, he's still saying bury your dead for free, but he already dropped the price. He already said, oh, this land is not a lot. It's only 400 shekels of silver, which the rabbis say is a tremendous amount of money. But he says, what's the big deal? It's only worth 400 pieces of silver. But we're friends, so take it for free. So he got the price in, but he's still being polite. Avram heard the price. Okay, so verse 16. And Abraham listened to Ephron. He heard what the guy is saying. He heard that he dropped the price. And Abraham weighed out to Ephron the silver that he had named in the hearing of the sons of Het, 400 shekels of silver accepted by the merchants. In other words, they were the best currency, easy to trade. And then verse 17 is the culmination. And so the field of Ephron, which was in Machpelah, facing Mamre, was established as Abraham's possession. This included the field and the cave that was in it, and all the trees that were in the field, which were within its entire border around. It was to Abraham as a possession before the eyes of the sons of Het, and the presence of all who had come within the gate of the city. And then Abraham buries his wife. So that's the negotiation back and forth. We want to figure out, why do I need all these verses? What is the story? What is the deeper story? What's behind the scenes? What's taking place behind the scenes? Go ahead, Dr. Ken, please.
My question is, if Hebron was purchased by Abraham, wouldn't it make sense that today Hebron should be in Jewish hands rather than in the hands of the Arabs?
Yeah. In fact, if you open up the news today, you'll see that the settlers are trying to build a house in Hebron, which they bought, and now the government this morning, as we speak, is trying to stop them. So you have a very good claim, but you're not the first person who said it. The first person who said it is the Medrash. The Medrash says that there are 3 peak places that in the Bible that says that a Jew bought the parcel of land. In other words, it's ours in Israel, not only because of conquest, which is a legal way of taking possession, but also because we paid for it. What are those 3 places? Hebron, the burial spot where Joseph was buried, which was bought by Jacob, and the Temple Mountain, which was bought by King David. He took money from all 12 tribes, and he paid for that plot of land, that spot. Then at that point, it was a threshing floor, belonged to a Jebusite named Aravna. We paid cash for these 3 places, in addition to our right to the land because of conquest. Says the Medrash, what's ironic is specifically the 3 places of land that we paid for. That's the place that the Gentiles complain in more than other places that we are thieves. And even till today, where's the most tension is Temple Mountain. Well, that's every day. Turn on the news just the last couple of weeks.
Right.
It's all about Temple Mountain and Hebron and the tomb of Joseph, which no longer we have control of. This is another story. So that shows that the complaints against us is not because are not justified and not legal. It's just because people don't like us in the neighborhood. But you're right. I agree with your question.
And then can I just add one little bit to that?
Please.
Why did he want to pay for the property?
That's a good question. Why did he want to pay for it? Why not just take it for free? So, well, we know that people, okay, so that's a good question. That's a good question. So we'll start from the second question, and there's at least there's 2 general themes here, 2 general ways of reading the story. I'm going to start with one, and then we'll go to the other. So the first interpretation is as follows. The first interpretation is that burial spot. What does a burial spot really mean? If you're the tribe, right, it's a very tribal society. By the way, even today, people talk about. Okay, I don't want to get political. People talk about the Palestinian people in the West Bank. It's very tribal. And every city is dominated by other tribes. That's the way it is even till today. And Hebron is different than the other surrounding cities. If you know what's going on there, Hebron is dominated by Hamas supporters. Other cities are not that way. It's very tribal. And when you have a tribal society, you don't really want somebody else in your midst. And you certainly don't want someone laying roots. Now, what does a burial spot mean? If we sell you a burial spot, what does that mean? It means you're coming back here. Because it's not just a burial spot for one person, but it's for the family. So if they would sell you a burial spot, what they're really saying is they're giving you a deed to the land and you're saying you belong here. They didn't want to do that. What they would do for everybody who was a stranger, they had a communal cemetery. You have a dead person, bury your dead. But it doesn't become your plot. Your plot means you're here and you have a stake in this land, and it's not just temporary, but it's multi-generational. Okay? If that's the way you understand the culture of the time, which people say that's the way it was, now let's revisit the story. Abraham comes to the people of Chet and says, I want to bury my dead. What do they say? Sure, take a piece for free. What are they telling him? It's not they're not so nice. What they're telling you is, they're doing it in a nice way, but they're telling you is, sorry, we're not selling you land. Because if we sell you land, that's an acknowledgement that you have a stake here. And this is your place for your family for generations to come. So they say, take any place you want, but we're not giving you title. That is the tension here. And Abraham therefore insists. He says, this is the land promised to Abraham, knows this is the land promised to him by God. So when he wants to bury Sarah, he wants acknowledgement from the people that this is the place that we belong. And that's why you have 13 verses describing the negotiation, because there was a lot at stake here. And that's why when Abraham buys the land from Ephron, he's buying a transaction. He's buying a cave and a field from some guy. He keeps saying this was in the presence of all the people of Chet. This negotiation happened to the ears of all the people of Chet. What does that mean? It means everyone has to agree. Town hall has to agree. There has to be a vote to allow the sale of a land to an outsider. Certainly sale of a land of a burial place which, like I said, represents that you have a multi-generational claim in this land that you're going to be here and your grandkids are going to be here. And that's why it's not a personal negotiation between Abraham and Ephron. Abraham should have sent his real estate agent, go to Ephron, close the deal. No, Abraham tells the people of Chet at the gate of the city. Gate of the city is town hall. That's the gate of the city. Everyone gets together at the gate, and that's where they do the business. And he says, people, please speak to Ephron to sell me the land. What he really wants to say is, I want you to give permission to Ephron to sell me the land. And they're reluctant, but they do it. And that's what's at stake here. And that's why Abraham wants to pay, not only because there's a value of not accepting gifts. We know Maimonides talks about this, and other people say, actually, King Solomon says, someone who hates gifts will live. Better not to take gifts. That's not what's happening here. I mean, that too, maybe. But what's really happening here is Abraham has the promise, the divine promise that this land is going to be given to him and his children. This is the point where he's burying Sarah. He's setting roots in this land. In other words, he's not just here as a temporary place to live, but we're going to be coming back here. This is our inheritance. This is the place where our family is rooted. And therefore, he has the negotiation in the presence of the entire city, because he needs the entire city to agree to change the law, to allow them to sell land to an outsider. And ultimately, when they agree to sell, they're not just giving up a piece of real estate, but they're acknowledging that Abraham has a claim to that land. So now, once you have that background, now you read the verses again, you say, oh, it's a total different story. You see the real tension. What was really happening here? It wasn't that they were so nice and they said, okay, take it for free. No, they don't want to give, they don't want to sell title. That is one interpretation.
Thanks, Rabbi. That's good.
So they had no recourse later on
That's right.
at all.
Yeah, they acknowledged that Abraham, yes, that's right. They acknowledged. He knew that. Now they knew that he knew. So ultimately they didn't want to, but ultimately when he insists, at the end of the day, they respected him. He was Nasi Elohim. They tell him, you're the Prince of God. And when he insisted, so they said, because they respected him. They respected him. He was the Prince of God. They respected him. But just because they respect him doesn't mean we know, but once it's very hard to say no to someone like Abraham. But at the end of it, so they tried to say no as much as they could. But when he insisted, this is what I want. It's either you're going to honor me or you're not going to honor me, but this is what I want. Then they accepted. They honored. They did have respect for him. And when he asserted himself in that way, they tried to not give him that thing because they'd rather give him honor in other ways. Give him a nice title, give him an ad in the newspaper. But we don't want to actually give up, we don't. But if you insist this is the only way you want to be honored, okay, they're going to go along with it. Yes.
Is this the first informational thing we have about a grave recognized?
Yes. Yes.
This is it. So
it's synonymous
with a memorial plaque, the cave.
Yes. Yes.
So that's it. That's our first.
Yeah. First time that it's described. I mean, people died and were buried before, but not that the Torah spends time about this. By the way, I think that even history would tell you that I think that burial plots, I may be wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, I think that people would say that burying the dead and marking the burial spots, in other words, cemeteries begin once you have agriculture. In other words, when people are hunter-gatherers, they're moving from place to place. They bury their dead, but they're not gonna make a place and a sign because they weren't planning on coming back. But a burial, a cemetery really means that you're connected to one specific place. And in that context, when Abraham says, I want a burial spot and I want to buy one, and he doesn't say, can I have a grave? He says, achuzat kever. Achuzat is an estate. I need an estate for burial, meaning it's a family plot. It's not just, they keep saying, the best grave, bury your dead, meaning meitecha, you're dead in the singular. In other words, one person. He's like, I don't need one grave. I need a cave. A cave is a place where you can have multiple graves, right? And they are not super excited to agree with them, but ultimately they do.
Is that why they don't allow cremation?
Oh, that's the next point. But hang on right there. Barry has a question. You're next. You're next.
Yeah. I apologize. I was a little drifting during this stuff. Maybe you covered this. Would not one think now that Hebron is maybe more significant than, say, Jerusalem?
In some ways, historically speaking, well, Jerusalem is a spiritual place. Hebron is one of the 4 holy cities. But if you want to talk about historically, there's no city that has Jewish history that goes back as far as Hebron. Hebron is much more ancient and had a lot more going on than Jerusalem. I remember when I was a kid and the Oslo Accord started. I guess I was a young teenager. And we had a Chabad newspaper, a Chabad magazine, weekly magazine, and they would constantly interview different Israeli politicians. And once they interviewed Arik Sharon, that later became the prime minister of Israel. At that point, he was very extremely right wing, and then later he became more central or more left, depending how you count it. And he said, if we are a normal country, every single kid in Israel would be taken to Hebron. There is no country that has all its founding fathers and mothers buried in one place. Okay, could you imagine if you had a place in Washington with all the founding fathers are buried? We would all go there. And in Israel, it doesn't happen that way. Most Israeli kids were never in Hebron. And he was saying that that is absurd. But you're right. Our history in the land of Israel, even more than Jerusalem, is in Hebron. Now, which one is more holy? Jerusalem is more holy, but that's because of the temple, and that's because the place God chose. But Hebron is classified as one of the 4 holy cities. But like I said, historically, our connection to the land of Israel, our history in the land of Israel starts in Hebron. Doesn't start, but is the first permanent place is Hebron. So there's a lot more Jewish history in Hebron than even in Jerusalem. When this was happening, Jerusalem was probably a very small spot on the map. Melech Shalem was a small little settlement. It was not a big deal. It only becomes a big deal in David's times. Later, it becomes a big deal. Yeah.
Why did he pick that? Why didn't they get buried in Jerusalem?
So, well, Jerusalem was not a place. The commentaries explain that there's spiritual significance there. There is Abraham and Sarah, Adam and Eve were buried there. They continue when they say that Hebron is actually the place of the bonding of heaven and earth in some sense. That's part of the word Hebron, chibur, connection. It's supposed to be a very spiritual place, the gates of heaven. The Medrash says that the prayers go through Hebron. So I'm not an expert in defining the difference between the holiness of Hebron and the holiness of Jerusalem. I would say, if you put me on the spot, I would say as follows, that Jerusalem represents the holiness that the human beings create. We build a home to God. It's man-made. Hebron is much more natural holiness. It's a place where naturally the heaven and earth meets. That's what the word Hebron means, connection. So the 2 ways of celebrating holiness that God creates, holiness that the human being creates. In Judaism, we emphasize the holiness that the human being creates, and that's why Jerusalem becomes the capital. But that's, like I said, I'm not an expert in the gradations of holiness. But if you look, for example, all over the Tanakh, you look at King David, for example. He first ruled in Hebron for 7 years, and only then did he move to Jerusalem. So Hebron is an integral part of our history.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there midrash that Abraham knew that Adam and Eve were buried there?
Yes. So Abraham, when you buy real estate, the first thing, the biggest mistake, of course, to show any enthusiasm and show that you want this piece of land. Any enthusiasm you show, you make a smile, the price just went up by 5%. So Abraham is very smart. He doesn't right away come and say, "Can I have this field?" No, he plays out, "I want a field." Only later he says, "Can I have that little cave?" You know, it's at the edge of his field. He's downplaying it. He's not telling you how great it is, which means because if he would, they wouldn't sell. Now, was he doing something not 100% honest? So some of the interesting comment, there's an interesting, if you like legal analysis, is a very interesting analysis that one of the later commentators says. He says like this: if you buy something and the seller can later come back and say that the sale was by mistake because I didn't understand the value of the land. There is a notion where you can come and say mekach was the sale is predicated on a mistake, and in certain cases, if the sale is predicated on a mistake, it can be undone. So what happens if Ephron later finds out that this is Adam and Eve are buried here? Okay, he may come back and say the deal is done. Here's your money back. Give me the land back. So Abraham is very smart. Abraham says, "Kesef maleh, with full money, yitnena li, let him give it to me." But the root for yitnena is matana. With full money, I want to pay full price. Gift it to me for full price. Gift it to me for full price. If I'm paying it for you as a gift, if I'm paying full price, it's not a gift. So Abraham wants that in the bill of sale, there should be a clause that this is not only a sale, but it's also a gift, because the gift can never be undone. That's the key. You can't come and say, oh, I didn't really understand the value of the gifts. I want it back. The whole idea of a gift is I'm giving it to you, even though what I get in return is not, I didn't get anything. What I got in return is not the same value. In other words, it's not a price. You could say I got the wrong price. I'm going back. So without getting into the legal scenarios where a person is able to retract a sale by a claim of saying it's predicated on a mistake, that's a separate discussion, but there's a possibility. When it comes to a gift, there's no possibility. If you give me your gift and say, oh, I didn't realize it was more valuable than I thought. That's just the way it is. So that phrase in verse, if you want to look at the phrase, if he says, verse 9, let him grant me the cave of Machpelah, which is his at the edge of his field. Let him grant it to me for its full price. I don't know what grant is. Grant means, does grant mean a gift or buying? I don't know. But in any case, yitnena could mean give, but the root is matana.
Grant is usually gift, I think.
Gift, right? So grant is a gift. So you see the translate, at least the article translated yitnena, they're trying to incorporate the idea of gift. Gift it to me for full price. What are you saying? Because he didn't want any escape a way out to nullify the sale. He says it's a sale, but it's not only a sale, it's also a gift. I want that in the document. I want the lawyers to sign for that. And that's what happens. Yeah.
It's giving you more power.
It's additional rights. Agreed.
So that it's going to be written later on, he made the decision to do it.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the first interpretation. Now I'm going to go to Seth's point. Totally different way of looking at the story. Again, the question is, why do I need all these verses? Why do I need 13 verses describing the negotiation? So the first interpretation we get, the first interpretation was they don't really want to sell because selling acknowledges that he and his descendants have a claim to this land. So they don't want to sell. When he insists, they agree to sell. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation for the Malbim, 19th century sage, very interesting interpretation, ties into what Seth says. Seth wants to know, is this why we don't cremate? Says the Malbim like this. In those days, I don't know for a fact, so I don't know. But the Malbim says in those days, the people buried just as it was just functional. In other words, you buried someone because you didn't know what to do with the body. But a little while later, or a few years later, they would just dispose of the grave. They would just use the grave for other uses, and they were not really concerned with what was happening there. In other words, it wasn't supposed to be permanent. Right? It's a different interpretation. You buried someone for a while and then you use the land to grow vegetables. It doesn't really matter. Abraham is coming to them and telling them, I need a piece of land that's going to be a burial plot forever. And that would be strange to them. Why so? I know in Egypt they did that, but in Canaan at that time, they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't necessarily do that. So the Malbim argues what Abraham is telling them, he's actually educating them about the immortality of the soul, that the soul always lives on. And because the soul always lives on, you want to honor the soul by honoring the place where the soul was, meaning the body. Even if the body is going to decompose, but you still want, you mentioned the plaque, right? There's a place where you always remember the soul because the soul is not gone. The soul is immortal. So according to the Malbim, all this negotiation, I'm willing to pay a tremendous fortune for a burial spot. That would make the news in that region. That would make the front page news. And the language of the Malbim, he's really seeking to educate them about the immortality of the soul. Hisharut hanefesh, that the soul is everlasting. And that's another way of viewing this entire story.
This is completely different. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So in the old days, you could either cremate or you could bury somebody. In modern times, you can give your body to science. Does Judaism have a point of view on that? Because that seems to be a very charitable thing to do to advance our knowledge of.
Yes, very utilitarian. Okay, so it sounds like the right thing to, very utilitarian. And what are you going to gain by putting someone into the earth? So when it comes to issues of what Judaism says that you have to bury the body. It's in the Torah. Your earth, you go back to earth. The problem with making a utilitarian argument, isn't it much more valuable to donate it for scientific purpose? The problem is, what's the value behind this notion of burial? The value is respecting and honoring the soul and respecting and honoring life. And if life is boiled down to a utilitarian purpose, or the body is boiled down to a utilitarian purpose, that could be a moral danger, right? Because the value of life and the honoring of life has to be absolute. And that's why if it's a question of honoring the body, which is really honoring the soul, which is really honoring life, which is really honoring the spark of God within the human being, or versus a utilitarian benefit, that becomes a little tricky, because once you give into the utilitarian benefit, all of a sudden you start measuring life in a utilitarian way.
Saving a life, which.
So that's a question. That's
Another question.
let me step back. Let me say, I'm not saying it's never allowed. I'm just saying the reason what's at stake here is not just utilitarian. What's at stake here is it's not just honor for the body. What it is really teaching people about the value of life, and the value of life has to be absolute. It doesn't necessarily mean that in some cases it can't be done. But I'm just saying it's not a lot more than just, okay, what do we do with the body? What the society does with the body really tells you how society values the soul, and how society values life. And once you start cutting corners, it can get very dangerous. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it's never allowed, but I'm just saying it's very important to understand this notion that at some point you have to say, even if there's a utilitarian benefit, but because we honor the soul and we honor life, we'll honor the vessel for life, which is the body. That would be what's at stake. What to do in a given scenario, you have to speak to the expert rabbi. I'm not an expert rabbi.
And then you bury the body after that. Is that?
You have to speak to your expert, local Orthodox rabbi. I'm local, I'm Orthodox, but I don't know that I'm an expert. But you get the point. This is a serious issue, because it's not just a question of burial and whether or not I'm technically allowed to do something, but it's really burial, and that's what the Malbim was saying about to Seth's point, that when he's telling them about burial, he's really telling them how to honor life and how to treat life. Life is not just a utilitarian function and how you value life, but the soul is immortal and life has infinite value, and therefore, yes, you're going to pay a lot of money for a burial spot because burial matters. It doesn't necessarily matter for the body, but it matters as a symbol to honor the value of the soul and the value of life.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I think one thing that we do that may best exemplify the argument of not harvesting an organ is that, God forbid, if a Jewish person dies in an accident with blood on their clothes, they can't be changed.
Right.
They have
You bury
to
every part, right?
With that blood,
Yeah.
because that blood is part of them.
That represents in Jewish culture that the body and the blood, and this is it's an honor to life. It's not just we bury because we have nothing to do with the body. No, we bury because that's how we celebrate the sacredness of life. Go ahead, Steve.
I think Abraham Heschel made this point, and I remember it from him. But in the 1930s, it was common to say that all the chemicals in the body are worth 98 cents.
Right.
And I even remember seeing it in some movie. I don't know whether it was
Right.
Dr. Mark's movie or whatever.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing it in the movie in that period.
Yeah.
And during that period, the value of a person, I mean, there was the false science of eugenics,
Sure.
Which led to fascism.
Yep.
And so the value of a human being, assigning 98 cents to its value, during the period where that happened,
You see, the ramifications were severe, and I don't have a word enough to describe how terrible the ramifications were, but that's case in point, right? Once you say you're valuing life, based on what the value is, and there's dangers because capitalism, in some sense, if you take it to the extreme, you say, what is the value of a person? That which a person could produce. And actually in the Torah's system of law actually changes that. And we mentioned it last week's parsha without getting into the details. In the local law, before the Torah was given in the Near East, they have different codes that they found, the Hammurabi code and other codes. What all these codes have in common is sometimes if you kill somebody, you can pay the value of what they are worth. How do you calculate that? Well, that which they can produce, right? And the Torah goes out of its way. No, if you kill somebody, there's capital punishment. And the Torah goes multiple times. The Torah says, do not take payment as punishment for killing. In other words, if someone kills someone, you can't just write a check and say, well, let's calculate everything the person would be able to produce, give them a check, and then you're off the hook. Why should I go to prison? Why should I be put to death? Here, I compensated the family for whatever life is worth. So you see that in that society, maybe in other societies too, maybe even today, there's a danger of this, but in that society, they equate a person with the economic productivity of that person. And that was the value. And the Torah is here, all the Torah's civil law is here to essentially to undermine that one point, that you can equate human life with utilitarian measurements of how much a person could produce.
That's the way life insurance agents calculate how much what kind of
Life
policy.
insurance people that couldn't do that. That's okay because you're selling a product. But if you value a person based on how much life insurance they're worth, that would be dangerous. And again, it could be that if you tell me that our culture does that up to an extent, I would say, I agree with you, but that's
You
wrong.
don't value the life insurance based on.
You value their
what their family
right. Yeah, that's right.
needs.
But you have to be there's a slippery slope. There's a slippery slope between valuing what I'm worth economically and what I'm worth as a human being.
What
That-
they need.
Yeah, look, in our, I don't want to get into this, but in our culture, there is a lot, people, okay, I don't want to get into this right now. It's too political, but you get what I'm saying. You get what I'm saying, that when Abraham is saying burial, again, all Malbim, all Seth's point, the Malbim is saying this whole discussion about spending a fortune on a burial plot is actually part of Abraham's educational mission to the people of Canaan, teaching them about the value of life and the immortality of the soul. So that's the Malbim in short. Go ahead, Dr. Ken.
When Abraham bought the the property, with the intent of burying his wife in the cave, how would the mechanics go? I mean, from what you have learned.
So in the ancient, in Israel, it's actually common, even today, they do that to an extent. What they would do is, instead of burying a person in the earth, when you go into a cave, you can bury a person in the walls of the cave. In other words, instead of in the ground, if you're in a cave, you can bury someone in the walls of a cave.
Yeah.
And that's what they would do. And I think they're doing that right now in Jerusalem. They just opened up an underground massive cave for burial. I think So there's different laws of how close you can bury. Without getting into this, it was very common that we'd actually bury in the walls of the cave as opposed to in the floor.
And would you roll a stone at the mouth of the area that you buried the body, or how?
Well, you would cover it. You would dig a tunnel within the wall, put in the body, and then fill up the opening.
A sarcophagus
Okay, but then there's a space in the.
of wall.
But that's not the whole cave. There's a hollow space in the cave where you can hang out.
Oh, to party.
You walk into a cave. Let's say this room is a cave. I walk into this room. I have earth on all 4 sides of me, all 6 sides of me, right? So I have an empty space, empty cavity, empty hollow space. But then I go to the nearest wall, I dig a tunnel, put the body in, close off the tunnel, I still have my cave.
Got it.
So that's the way they would do it.
So we'll have to build a mausoleum and do that.
I don't know what a mausoleum is. I don't know what it's made of. Is it made of earth or stone? If it's made of earth, you're allowed to, but they're not made of earth.
They're made of stone.
They're made of stone, cement, I don't know what they're made of. But theoretically, if it's made of earth, it's not a problem because it's in the earth.
Nice.
So if you see what I'm saying? If it's earth, it's earth.
Did each couple pay $400?
No, Abraham paid for the family slot. You have a rich grandfather, it works. A great grandfather, it works. 400 for the whole field and the cave. So the cave had 8 spots or 6 spots because 2 were taken by Adam and Eve. Yeah, that's for that. One more point. You have 2 minutes left. There's another whole way of reading the negotiation, which we'll say for next week. But one more point. It's called Me'arat HaMachpelah, the double cave. Why is it called a double cave? So there are all kinds of interpretations. Rashi quotes interpretations. Rashi says like this. Let's see Rashi. Let's find Rashi here. Where's the Rashi? Let me add my notes. Rashi says here. So Rashi, Marat HaMachpelah. Okay, double cave, right? Verse 9, chapter 23, verse 9. That he may give me the machpelah, the double cave, which belongs to him, which is at the end of his field, for a full price. Let him give it to me from in your midst for burial property. Says Rashi, double. Why is it called double? A structure with an upper story above it. Another interpretation, it was called so because it was doubled with couples. In other words, the structure of this cave was you can put two graves right next to each other, so it's doubled, so you got couples. It's a burial spot for couples. But the first interpretation is it's a double cave because it's a structure with a cover on top of the structure. So without getting into the details, let's assume it's a cave, it's a mountain, and there are two caves, one on top of the other. That's the first interpretation of Rashi. If it's the first interpretation of Rashi, it would be the more prominent one, that more straightforward one. So now he's buying a double cave. Why a double cave? Why two-story cave? So the commentator that says that what we mentioned till now, that Abraham is really trying to teach them about the immortality of the soul, says something interesting. Let me just make sure that I'm saying this right. Pretty sure this was said by somebody. No, I can't find it. Somebody said this. So if he's telling them about, he does say it. Yes, beautiful. The Malbim says, again, he says that really what we're trying to tell, Abraham is trying to teach them and to allude to them about the immortality of the soul, that even though the soul passes away from this earth, but it goes to the higher earth, it goes to the higher plane, it goes to the higher domain, it goes to the spiritual reality. Says the Malbim, this is alluded to in double cave. What does double cave mean? You have a story with a story above. There's two layers to reality. There's the lower layer, which is the physical reality, and then one story above is the spiritual reality, is the heaven. So buying a double cave, says the Malbim, is alluding to the higher dimension where the soul and life continues after the soul life on this earth ceases. So that's just a remez. That's just alluded to with the double cave, according to the Malbim. It's too good not to bring to your attention. So I'm happy to be able to do that.
Brilliant guy, wasn't he?
He was very creative.